At this time, I'd like to reconvene this meeting of the California Citizens Redistricting Commission. The time is now 5:58 p.m. We are going to go back into our agenda. Before we get to the more administrative items, we do have two action items remaining held over from our advisory committee meetings. The first of these, and potentially the most pressing, is the budget. And so with that, I'll hand this back over to Commissioner Dye, representing the Finance and Administration Advisory Committee.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you have in front of you a revised pro forma budget based on the input that we provided to Mr. Claypool. So you'll notice that the number of business meetings, the days have been increased. You'll also notice we still have the line item in there for educational outreach, even though we've basically decided to get rid of at least 8 out of 9 of those. We'll get to that in a second. Same thing for, it carries over both for commission and staff and travel. Also, the contracts were split over 2 fiscal years, as was suggested. Mr. Claypool, I just note that you still have payment on completion in the notes, so you might want to just remove that.
I still have what?
Payment on completion in the notes on the side, so you might just want to remove that.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess my question to Mr. Claypool, given that we basically need something that's pretty close so that we can get this Department of Finance letter out, to what degree do you think we need to tweak this based on recent decisions that we just made with CCP's contract? Commissioner Ward, did you?
Thank you. The only reason I inserted myself here is I had a recommendation on a tweak, and I'd like Dan to comment on it with the others. And I beg the Commission's kind attention on this because I know it's late and it's hard to move into this, but it's something I think is important. I guess in being up here and seeing our business function, seeing our staff function, it occurred to me that when we started this and we evaluated our staffing needs, it was with the paradigm we had then. As we all can agree, that paradigm has dramatically changed from a month ago, from 2 weeks ago. And considering the increased function that we're considering putting on staff, to include scheduling and broadening the job duties of basically everyone that we have, realizing that the staff is already taxed to a maximum. I think that for this budget, the Commission needs to consider the addition of a retired annuitant as a secretary or in a staff role, and I'd like to just have that idea remarked on by staff at this time.
Actually, that's thank you. We're absolutely at the peak, and we're beyond the peak, and particularly Janice, who I'm trying to on a daily basis make sure she comes to work, and so but no, we need somebody else to help with just the day-to-day functions in the office. We do have the retired annuitants that we brought forward, but they have very specific tasks. I have to say, Oral and Carol are also starting to just help wherever they can because they see the look of desperation in our faces sometimes. But it would be welcomed if we could pick up at least a retired annuitant to carry us through. This person would probably carry through more in line with the staff functions above, not a temporary person, but a person that would go all the way through October and help with us just in that function. So I welcome that suggestion, and if the Commission is good with it, we would look for a retired annuitant to help us.
Dan, considering that with your input that you guys see yourself at maximum, and I think we would all agree that the job duties for all of us are going to increase, not decrease, as the months go by. Would you say that the need for that addition is critical to performing the function of staff at this point?
Yes, particularly given that we don't have the budget officer on board. But and once we get the budget officer on board, and that's a big win, then it eases quite a bit for me. But this particular additional position is just needed, and just for Christina and Janice, just to take some load off of them, because right now it's become a 7-day, 10-hour-a-day job, and we need to move that off.
We do have Commissioner Filkins-Weber and then Commissioner Dye.
So 2 questions just on that issue, because my other original question is another clarification on this.
Go ahead.
Do you need to then add a line for your proposed retired annuitant on page 1 under staff salary costs?
Yes.
Okay, and do you have a proposal so that we could just ask that you amend it, but if our intention is to pass this budget or at least put it up for a vote right now, can you tell us what that would be first? And then I have a second question for another correction.
I can tell you that it would be no more than the current program analyst position, and probably less. So if you could give me the authority to go up to the amount shown for the program analyst AGPA, then that would be the most that it would increase, and it could probably be less, but it would not be more.
Okay, and my second question is I understood it, page 2, technical analyst. On the original budget we discussed this morning, the amount was $200,000, and we had asked that it just be split among the 2 fiscal years. But on page 2 of your amended one, you added $100,000 rather than splitting it. Did I misunderstand?
Well, there was an addition. At first we split it, and then there was the request that we have an increase by $100,000 because we had the discussion of demographers and so forth. And so I just steadied the 200 and added the one in the front
I
year.
must have missed that.
This was in regards to a comprehensive evaluation
Thank you.
and final report.
Maybe to clarify it, instead of calling it technical analyst, since we have technical consultants, would it be easier to give it another name? I don't know if Commissioner Filkins-Weber was getting that confused with our technical consultants, but.
And I think we had at least asked to have in the notes for this line item a note that specified evaluation.
Mr. Claypool?
Mr. Claypool?
Yes,
Could
I'm
you
sorry.
add in the notes
Yes.
some note around evaluation or evaluator?
Right. I was trying to. You had given a specific term. That's what I asked Kurt. Can you? So, what was a specific term for the person we discussed?
Process rather than peer review.
Process evaluation. Okay.
No.
No, I think we're mixing up our processes here. So, Commissioner Aguirre, I think you're the one who suggested it initially.
Yes, we talked about the in-process reviewer, right? Formerly known as a peer evaluator, or peer reviewer. And this one was to have an ongoing evaluation done of the process. In consultation with Mr. Anchetta, we thought that $100,000 would do it. So it's for an evaluator.
And that's of the commission, not the
Yeah.
line drawing.
Yes.
Was it ongoing? I thought it was after the fact.
Yes. That's why it's in the second fiscal year.
Yes.
Yeah.
Post evaluation.
Right. And I thought we had talked about actually using the term experts.
I must have missed that. So what we're going to call it, technical experts? Is that what you're referring to? Rather than technical analysts?
I mean for the actual
For the title.
the term.
Yeah.
Whatever. I'm sorry. I really don't have any strong feelings one way or the other. Experts is fine if that would be more descriptive. It's
Certainly. Changed.
I think our main concern was that the notes be explanatory enough that we know exactly when we read it what our intent was.
For Chair.
I'm sorry, Commissioner Parvenu.
For clarification, I was under the impression that this category also included funds if required for something such as a racial, what we know to be racial polarization study as well? Okay, I don't see it indicated there, but I guess it's open. Okay, fine. Just wanted to make sure that was the intended purpose.
Thank you, Commissioner Ward, for your suggestion. I wondered if you could give us, the retired annuitants have been perfect for many jobs, but in this case, I wonder if you could give us the budget flexibility to go with either a retired annuitant or someone else, because we're just looking for a different kind of skill set. The dollars would not change.
I think that would be fine. In fact, I would just put 2 program analysts, just multiply that times 2.
I'm sorry, I was referring back to Commissioner Ward's motion earlier.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Times 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments on the budget?
So that I can be clear, the process for bringing that person aboard will be the same as we've done. It will go with the procurement contract, and then we will get your approval on the next meeting. Okay?
I have one comment on this, and I know that we're operating under a lot of restrictions in terms of time and annuitants and who's available. We have had twice, I think, comments about the composition of our staff in terms of diversity. And so I would really urge us to try and get us many diverse candidates for this staff position. It's been brought to our attention several times.
I can say that on the last time that we did it, we actually solicited comments from, or actually applicants from the commenters, and made an offer to one which was the basis for raising the rate, and that person still balked at the advanced rate, and understandably so, because that person had participated in a very high level of government. But we're very aware of that, and it is always first and foremost in our mind. At this point, I can say that it's just been the candidate pool that we've gotten, and it's mainly come from Sacramento, and that's because this is where the job is primarily located. But we'll keep that absolutely in mind.
Mr. Claypool, could I make the request that for this position you prioritize getting the word out through the Redistricting California network, who has really tapped into a more diverse pool than potentially our networks right here in Sacramento? Other comments or questions? And Commissioner
Clarification. Thank you. A clarification. Because Commissioner Dice suggested just simply doubling the figure. Which one would be doubled? Or
it's the final category in the staff salary cost program analyst, and the basic job category is associate government program analyst, which is.
Okay. So the question I would have is, because I think that's budgeted all the way through fiscal 2012, is that position needed to be funded at that level all the way through 2012?
No, and in fact, if you'll go up to the commission assistant, AGPA, same level, that goes through 10/30/11. That's where we would carry it.
Okay, so the line above is what's being done.
Right.
Commission analyst.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine.
Other questions or comments regarding this revised budget?
So my only question to the Commission is, well, I guess I have one question for Mr. Claypool first. We have the line drawing expertise for the outreach meetings, which we've now essentially eliminated. But my question is, that's not a fixed fee contract, correct?
Actually, that number, that line drawing expert for outreach will remain. It will be reduced because the Rose Institute will be instrumental in assisting with the information that's put into the video.
Sure.
Okay, so there will be a reduction.
Is it a fixed fee, or is it based on time, or?
It was originally it was negotiated at the 16.5 was negotiated at a $3,000 base fee for production and $1,500 a meeting. What we will do is go back. I think they've actually already negotiated a reduced fee. I can't tell you what it was, but it will be.
Okay.
It'll be a different number.
Okay, great. And I just wanted to know if the commission felt the necessity to adjust any of the other numbers based on our discussion in the fact that we've changed out the educational workshops for probably replacing it with a video. We don't have to because it gives us a little bit of contingency there. But I just wanted to make sure everyone was comfortable with that.
I am, just given the fact that the plan is still in the works and nothing's been approved. So I think it would be prudent to push forth as listed, and obviously we're under no obligation to use it.
Excellent. In that case, I'd like to make a motion to approve this budget so that we can move forward with the Department of Finance letter for budget augmentation as amended.
A second. Second.
I think the first second that I heard was from Commissioner Baraba.
I'm going to have to remember to bring the budget up at the end of our meetings from now on.
And Janice, if you don't mind repeating back to us the motion.
The motion is to approve the budget.
Any discussion on the budget? Seeing none, are there any members of the public who would like to comment on the budget? Seeing none, I would like to call a vote. I will try a show of hands for this vote. All in favor of the motion as stated, please raise your hands and say aye. Aye. All those opposed, motion passes unanimously. Right.
All right.
All right, so the only outstanding item, business item that had bubbled up from our advisory committee meetings that we need to go back to was regarding the line drawing. And so I will defer back to Commissioner DiGiulio as liaison to that committee and to Commissioner Filkins-Weber, who had made some suggestions regarding this issue.
Well, I guess I wasn't bringing it up as an issue that we brought up from the technical committee. I was responding to a new suggestion, or should I call it a suggestion or an option? If you recall, what was proposed by Commissioner Filkins-Weber as an idea was that if we're going to eliminate the educational outreach aspects, that maybe there's a possibility that we begin some input hearings in March, or at least in maybe something can take us into early April. And in order to do that, because we are waiting on the IFB process, an option could be to potentially split that, a technical contract between Karen McDonald and Mr. Douglas Johnson. I think at this point the Commission has to make, maybe as a point of discussion, is that are we comfortable with just waiting until the IFB process is complete, and then we will have a technical consultant on base? We have kind of three options. It's just simply waiting, knowing that process could, I think at best, we would be lucky to get it have it in place by April 1st. And knowing that it could be pushed, and we had to consider those options in terms of falling back into an interagency agreement or a no-bid contract. The second option, as mentioned, would be a split between those two to at least initially get the process up and running and inputs, with those two individuals then giving their information to whoever is awarded a line drawer. And I think the third option, which has not been considered either, and I'm going to just put it out there as well, is if it is a priority for this Commission to begin those input hearings, and let me just say, I'm speaking for myself, not necessarily the technical committee here on this one, is I find it problematic to have two separate individuals do a temporary technical consultant for the input when we really, and then have them pass it off. I just think that's too many hands in the pot and to push the process. If the Commission feels it wants to move on the input hearings, then I think one of our realistic options, and it goes back into the fallback of either a no-bid contract, which I don't think is realistic, or is to go into the interagency agreement It's my understanding that Mr. Claypole has been working with Berkeley to try and move the process forward through the law school, which would then contract with Q2 staff, which would be Karen, we would make that decision to say we're going to do an interagency agreement for the line drawing. And then I would suggest if we did that, then we would continue with an IFB for the in-process review, which would then allow for maybe some of the balance issues and still allow for a public vetting process. And I would only add to that I know there's been concern, there's been issues about balance. And it's been, in my role as the technical advisory, having done some research on Karen McDonald and asking staff to do the same thing with other agencies and entities and states that have worked with her, her reputation is one of the most nonpartisan that we are going to get out there. It's not going to alleviate the issues that we have, but I think that is legitimately the case that she's one of the most nonpartisan out there. So if we went the interagency agreement, because the commission wanted to do the input hearings and she was enveloped under Berkeley as another buffer, that is an option. Otherwise, the only option is to wait for the IFB to play itself out.
Commissioner Dye, and then Commissioner Ward.
Commissioner DeGiulio, could you clarify? You said that the option was to do an interagency agreement with Berkeley, and then Berkeley would then contract with Q2, or Berkeley would have Ms. McDonald as an employee of Berkeley?
I'm sorry. Let me
as
clarify.
the statewide
I
database.
understand it. Mr. Claypole could say that, but it would be the staff similar. Just so you know, it's not as if we're contracting with UC Berkeley and it's a whole new set of people. It would be Karen, as I understand it, and maybe some of her staff, but it would be through the law.
Karen is director of the statewide database.
So because I was directed to move forward on all fronts, and an interagency agreement is a very real possibility. I was put in touch with the, I guess it's Dean Egley, is that it? Edley. Thank you. It was late. I had an email. And he and his staff are looking into the possibility of making it a more plausible work environment for the workers in Q2, and I'm assuming this means an absorption of that staff, and then some type of an agreement that they can work beyond the hours, because I believe part of the problem was a work, the number of hours that Berkeley allows its workers to be worked. So we are looking into that. So it has become what was implausible 3 weeks ago is now plausible. So, but that's the arrangement I believe they're talking about.
Commissioner Ward.
Commissioner DeGiulio, I was hoping you could just help me out by further defining. You mentioned that I thought that your option of having 2 contracts and more of a bipartisan approach to receiving public input seems on face to be an excellent option. You said that it was too many hands in the pot, and I was just hoping you could maybe explain why that would be so.
I guess this is just, is it so much as hands in the pot? I think there's a couple issues. I think the proposal of splitting them, Karen doing the north and Douglas Johnson doing the south, I think there's some element there of a Democrat-Republican split, even though I think, and this is my personal opinion, I think there's some elements that had been discussed about a split in terms of the areas of the state that they would take. But I think more importantly, to be honest, I think the issue is if we put the horse before the cart to some degree and say we're going to have these 2 people do some elements of the technology consultants for input hearings, but we don't really know how the final contractor will do it. I think it goes back to Mr. Anchetta's earlier point is, garbage in, garbage, I shouldn't say garbage. It's whatever we ask for them, if it's not consistent, then we could come into issues later on for us. So the consistency of having 2 individuals working, I think that the discussion how would they would work together, how would they be doing the same presentation, and then how would that be translated later on? I find it just very I just find it problematic, that option. That's my personal opinion about that option. So took it upon myself to say, if the commission would like to move forward with the input hearing, here's another option that we haven't considered as well.
Commissioner
It's moving
Blanco?
straight to the line drawer.
Yeah, I have 4 concerns about this arrangement. One was alluded to in some of the public comment that we got, both by mail and then yesterday, which is the fact that if we were going to go bipartisan, then we would really need to hire a Democrat to balance out the Rose Institute and Doug Johnson in particular, because as many people commented in the public comments we received, no matter what we heard from her competition at the Claremont meeting, she is personally an independent, apparently is perceived as an independent, and so I don't think this is a bipartisan approach. When Commissioner Filkins-Weber made the suggestion, she said, well, it's not a partisan issue when you have the person advising at the input hearings. But then if that's true, why are we striving for the bipartisanship? So, I don't understand that. If it's really just a technical position, why do we feel we need to do bipartisan? And it's not, in fact, bipartisan. And I want to say one thing else about sort of the neutrality, partiality, appearance, and all those issues. I thought some of Mr. Johnson's presentations, the materials in particular, were inappropriate. I thought they showed in themselves a bias, and I'm actually concerned that we're going to have them on our website, but, it's somebody else's, so what can we do about it? But I was concerned about the characterization of the Byrd Court, and then when it was another context, it was the Supreme Court. Those are, in California, buzzwords. We all know what they are. And I thought that to put that in a public presentation was really inappropriate. And I worry about, in fact, now that we are having him do content for our video or the other work with for our outreach, I'm concerned about. I now want to review some of those materials, to tell you the truth. And comments about in his written materials about Congressman Berman and his lieutenants. Now, I've sued Congressman Berman, so I'm not, and I had concerns about his congressional district in 2001. But to, in a public document, be use language like that, which is very derogatory, and nothing, none of the materials did anything, said anything about Republicans in that same vein. So, I have a particular problem with this institution now doing this, especially if it's an attempt at impartiality, because to me, we are not getting impartiality. And on a technical level, I'm concerned about 2 line drawers for North and South. I think some of the presentation about maybe you have somebody doing Congress and somebody doing, there might be issues about that are more like about time, and maybe it's the same shop but different people in the same shop doing the different maps. But if we split this like this, people do use different methodologies. And so we're going to have people presenting to people in the North and people presenting to folks in the South about what the process is, and they're going to be telling them different things. And we haven't hired them in order for us to vet what they're saying. If we're going to do that, we could we could, I mean, I'm not saying we could do it, but that's what we'll have to do to ensure consistency with these presentations. Because people do use different methodologies. We'll have to then merge them or put the time up front to make sure that they're consistent. And maybe we can do that, but it is time that we will have to take upon ourselves. So that's, I have other comments about whether we want to go to the interagency, but I think I just want to comment on this particular proposal, and then I reserve time to discuss the interagency stuff later.
Commissioner Ward.
Yeah, thank you for your comments, Commissioner. I don't feel personally it's appropriate to disparage, either the Rose Institute, Mr. Johnson, Corinne, Q2, any of that. I just don't think that gets us anywhere. I mean, the bottom line is there's no way around the fact that experts that have so far provided guidance to the Commission have partisan ties on both sides. Corinne is fantastic, but certainly there was a fair concern raised about a partisan past. Do I have issues with that? All of us have partisan leanings. Well, some of us, and we're all said we can put that aside and do the business of the people of California, and we're going to demand the same from whoever we hire. So I think that's just important to realize that everybody's going to bring baggage to the table. And we're the decision makers, and so we need to demand that they're able to put that aside too. And also, again, I'm new to the redistricting process, but my understanding is that we were going to have some control over, or direct control actually, over what input is solicited, what guidance is given, things like that. So as far as consistency issues, I mean, at this point, maybe it needs to be elaborated on so that I can catch up, but I just don't understand the consistency issues between having two different people. It doesn't seem to me like it's a science experiment where you need equal parts this, equal parts that, or the whole thing blows up. It seems to me like we're looking for public input on their neighborhoods and on their communities. And I guess I'm just missing where we lose anything, even with minor tweaks in that.
Commissioner Baraba and then Commissioner Filkins-Weber.
Yeah, first, relative to the comments were made in Claremont, I think they have been absolutely refuted. And I think all the evidence that's been presented by everyone else had proven them to be false. So to say that there was a statement made as to her impartiality being not clear, to my mind, I have not seen any evidence to that fact. In fact, all the evidence that's been presented since, including from Republicans in San Diego where she performed that activity, says she was extremely impartial. So the issue of impartiality, in my mind, though it's been raised, I really get upset with character assassination when it's not supported by facts. And so to that extent, I have a little hard time with the fact that somebody said somebody's not impartial, and in fact that makes them not impartial. Relative to dealing with 2 versus 1, all the conversation we had so far is it's going to be really hard for us as a group to be deeply involved in the direction to the map line drawers. It was going to be hard, and we kind of were working our way through that. If we have to deal with 2, I think we've just doubled the assignment. And I got to tell you, I was kind of sweating doing it with 1 correctly. And if I have to do it with 2, I think you just made the task far more difficult.
Thank you. Commissioner Filkins-Weber.
Given the lateness of the hour, I certainly don't want there to be any misunderstanding. And so let's just get down to what I had put on the table for consideration, because it only became a matter of timing and in light of the possibility that we do not get the opportunity to present an award to have somebody on board by April 1st. I was not suggesting 2 line drawers. I think we've already vetted that idea. I was only suggesting the possibility of having splitting up the work and getting us going right away. And our one concern was without having an input hearing without a technical expert to gather the data. That's initially what we were looking at. But let me give you some idea of our 14-day notice issue, because let's just get down to the nitty-gritty here. Let's not really get into probably the philosophical discussion which we've done before about whatnot. The bottom line is that if we consider looking at the contract, and if we upped our schedule by 2 weeks to consider an input hearing, let's say, again, March 1st is next week, right? So,
yes.
Okay. Just make sure I'm on the right calendar. So essentially, in order to hold, for example, an input hearing on March 19th, we'd have to provide notice next Saturday.
Yeah, you can.
Now, as I understand,
Dates again?
if we were to consider providing, that we had discussed earlier today the possibility of increasing or moving forward, moving closer to us, the input hearing schedule to get started right away. Because right now, based on the schedule that has been presented to us by CCP, the first input hearing is April 2nd. Under the assumption, I presume, that we would have an award and have somebody on board with us by April 1st. But that's my assumption. But if you just look at it practically speaking, I mean, if we're able to get to an input hearing and up the schedule by a couple of weeks, we would have to provide notice by next Saturday. And in addition, as I understand it, if provided everything works out with CCP, and I'm not making any predeterminations on my new delegated responsibility today, but aside from that, I do understand from Mr. Douglas, or Doug Johnson, excuse me, that they are ready to go, and based on the representations that were made by Ms. McDonald in Claremont, their materials are ready to go, but they're both experts in technical, data collection. And they didn't seem to have a problem with that. So, again, it was just a limited idea for the first initial input hearings. So if you're not ready to make that decision to move forward with an input hearing, the first one of which would be March 19th, in light of the possibility, in light of your educational issues, then this discussion is moot. And I would like to further comment on your Commissioner DiGiulio's third proposal. But I certainly just wanted to put it out there. It was something that was brought forward to my attention. It might have been one possibility, but again, when we're just looking at timing, we may need to revisit this, and we will have time to revisit this precise issue, consideration of just a small contract for data input only, if this award issue doesn't work out. And if our schedule gets messed up, we're looking at, and we'll get into a scheduling issue just momentarily, I suspect, that we're tentatively looking at our general meeting being rescheduled around 17th, 18th, unless it's subject to some other input from staff. But if that works out where we could be considering awards during that week, if we do run into some problem with the IFP or we had changed it, then we would be in a position to revisit this issue and still be in a 2-week notice situation, again, with the same possible consultants that we would ask to be technical data gatherers at the next input hearing if we don't have a final person on board.
I think that's the ultimate issue, that was if the commissioners wanted to have input hearings, where our choice is if we would like to go complete the IFB process, then that means I would assume there's not going to be input hearings until that technical consultant, that line drawer, is in place.
But no, this is an alternative to that.
But if we wanted to do that way and get our input hearings going now, then it was the issue of, in my mind, I saw the two options. Was the option you were presenting, which is, I had some issues with that, which is what I discussed, and so as a result, I said I wanted to propose that was my third option. If you want to have input hearings, I was proposing the third option, which you can comment on.
Okay, and I would like to comment, if I may, on that third. There's just 2 quick points. Number one, by considering an interagency agreement and foregoing what we had fully discussed in Claremont to proceed with the request for bid. I'm so confused about that terminology, but be that as may, it's an IFB right now, an invitation for bids, but just the solicitation in general. We were criticized at first, but for considering a sole source contract. I believe that the perception may very well be that we have put for the potential consultants have put forth significant effort, as well as our staff, to move forward with the process of solicitation, and that now we are then foregoing that entirely by considering an interagency agreement, and again with somebody that had been subjected to criticism by the public. But be that as it may be, let me get to point B, which is the problem. That I understood yesterday is that the in-process review individual would be subject to competitive bid. And if that individual is subject to competitive bid, it does not work with our intent to find a balanced individual. In other words, we would be subject to the lowest responsible bidder, and I don't know if we can fit the balanced nature within the word responsible when we're looking at competitive bid, and that's the information that Carol had provided yesterday. So and that would be for somebody in the in-process review that would be in excess of the $5,000. So we would not have the freedom to consider or select the in-process reviewer through a competitive bid process. So you're not going to, the balanced nature of that is not going to work with with your competitive bid, as I understand it.
Mr. Claypool and then Commissioner Anchetta.
Point of clarification, the 15th would be the next meeting for the legal subcommittee, as I understood it. The 17th, 18th, and 19th are locks. Regardless, we have to. The legal subcommittee needs to vet our VRA attorney. Mm-hmm. We are hoping that the bid process with the IFB for our line drawer collides with that date. If it doesn't, we might have to come back the following week, but the other alternative was by having the 10th and 11th was that we were looking at having to come back 3 weeks in a row. Right. That's why we dropped that date. On the point with the the IFB that we would have to do for the inline process reviewer, you're absolutely right. You have to put the criteria in there, and it would be that is a place where you could put a scoring matrix if you wished. You have the same issues. You have to score it in public. The pass-fail function can be a very high bar, so that you may not end up with somebody who is the exact polar opposite of whoever wins or whoever we make our award to, but you end up with somebody whose credentials are high enough so that they are relatively unassailable, and that's really what you want. You want somebody that is good enough at what they do and thought of well enough for what they do to make this review and give you an honest second opinion that people can live with. The last point that we were going to talk about was, or that I want to say is, on this issue of having Doug Johnson do it and having Karen do it, you can select Doug Johnson to do it all for uniformity. You can select Karen to do it all for uniformity. It doesn't. The idea was brought forth for splitting it because it had this balance, this symmetry to it that would ring this right bell. But it is bringing in the information early, very early in the process, and it isn't, as I understand it, it's to start the process, start the input, start gathering and hand it to somebody, and I know it's all input is very critical, but at the start of the process, it would seem to me as a layman, and perhaps Commissioner Baraba can tell me, less critical than the information we're going to get after we place our first maps out there and people really start diving into those lines. And by then, we would have our line drawer.
Thank you. Commissioner DiGiulio?
I think Mike was before me.
Commissioner Ward?
Actually, Mr. Anchetta was first.
Mr. Anchetta, that's right.
Commissioner Anchetta, then Commissioner Ward, and then Commissioner DiGiulio.
Well, I think it's an important discussion to have in terms of having contingencies, but I'm going to speak against the any recommendation that would push any input meeting into March for a number of reasons. One, the commission, and because this is pretty much it in terms of what we're going to be discussing for this meeting. I don't think the commission has sufficiently discussed to the level that the public will need relevant information and pertinent information regarding the input process. This commission has not discussed a number of, I think, very important concepts and areas within the Act itself so that we would have sufficient clarity for the public regarding appropriate data to have. So I think the commission needs to do that first before it has any input meeting. Second, and again, if we're looking at communities of interest and neighborhood information, that's fine, but the census numbers, even at the earliest, are not going to be available for a couple weeks still. And I think the public, at least the public that will want to look at those kinds of numbers, will need a little bit more time to digest them. Even if they're out, let's say, the week of the 14th, I think you need to look at that. Even the most at the basic level, even beyond just looking at a community of interest, you want to know where is it growing? What are the numbers telling me? But I do appreciate the fact that we do need to think about contingencies, and that to that extent we could still be delayed even past the beginning of April. So I think it's a very important topic to discuss. My feeling generally, and I share some concerns about Mr. Johnson's presentation today, but I'm less concerned about our consultants because my feeling is this commission needs to have very close oversight over anybody who is drawing lines and taking technical information. And to the extent we, as a commission, have a prerogative to really watch over those people's shoulders, whether it's one, I don't feel that comfortable with two because I think we're going to get too much stuff coming in. Mm-hmm. But I have no problem with Mr. Johnson. I have no problem with Ms. McDonald because I trust we can watch out for what they're doing. But I really strongly feel it's not in the best interest of the commission or our work to push it up that soon because I really think we want to make sure we're telling the public the right thing.
Commissioner Ward. Commissioner DiGiulio.
And a lot of that, all I would say is I would wholeheartedly agree. I would like to see the IFB process play itself out. We have at least the options, and I think we have, as we've discussed prior, we have some fallback measures. And if we meet on the 17th, 18th, and when we're meeting the next time, whatever that is, if we've realized that this process is not moving forward, then maybe we can consider this issue later. My intent with providing the third option was only that if the commission wanted to do input hearings, that was another option to consider. And just lastly, I think there is an element of concern because we feel like we need to get out there as soon as we can. But if I'm not mistaken, I heard Commissioner Dye say, for all of us who are concerned that March is going to be an empty meeting, we're not being utilized very well. From what I understand, is we're actually going to have quite a few things on our plate, and in a sense, doing our own outreach effort. That's all I have to say.
Commissioner Dye.
Yes, actually, I was going to say that. I mean, I think that I agree with Commissioner Anchetta that trying to rush into this prematurely when we haven't decided some basic things like what's the format we want information, received in. I have not heard that yet from the outreach committee, so I think we have not had a chance to even discuss the most basic information that we would need to accept public input right now. And I do think we are going to need time to build public awareness before we start this. Otherwise, you risk the problem of scheduling a public input meeting and then having no one show up. So I think we're going to need that lead time so that Mr. Wilcox can, get those engines going so that he has adequate lead time to make sure that people are ready to show up.
Commissioner Blanco.
And also, the having March open and not moving up any input meetings could actually give us the opportunity to do some of what you're suggesting, Commissioner Chet. In other words, we could have somebody come. Could use that time to become more knowledgeable about some of these issues. Like Mr. Johnson's handout had like 6 definitions of community of interest because there's a lot of differences of opinion about what constitutes a community of interest. There are there are issues. I know Commissioner Baraba has commented a couple of times about the article around nesting and how that interfaces with the Voting Rights Act. We could be, especially if you envision us as having a lot of oversight over the line drawers, we could use March to educate ourselves about some key concepts that we need to have under our belt.
Commissioner Filkins-Weber.
Given the lateness of the hour and also the necessity to probably get to scheduling, are we comfortable of just tabling this? I mean, we appreciate the discussion, but we see that it might be a necessity if we can't get our award out. Yeah. Everybody agree with that? Okay, so we put it out there. It's something that we might need to consider at our next meeting, but I don't think it's subject to any particular motion. And I would just ask that the chair I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would just like to say I believe that staff is already working on an interagency agreement as a backup plan. I would urge that they continue to do that because we don't know how this the bidding process is going to end up, and I do think we need a backup plan.
And we're working on all backup plans.
Thank you, Mr. Claypool. Mr. Baraba.
And I think it might be appropriate, maybe 2 members of the technical committee, so we'd be in compliance here, talk about what it is we think we need further training in, and then working with the staff, start identifying people who can come in and train us during this March period.
I'll run through. Excellent. So with that, we can now transition into our more administrative items. So we really are on the home stretch this time. That first time I said that was maybe a little bit of false advertising, so you didn't despair and have a mutiny on this commission meeting. So in closing out some of the standing items on the agenda, there were some carryover things that I just wanted to make mention of. One, Commissioner Baraba had referred earlier to this census webinar that's available online. You all have information on that, as does the public. Again, it's not a requirement, but it is there for you as a resource. We are working, Mr. Miller has been tasked and is working with members of the legal advisory committee have been giving him suggestions on who could provide us with some very substantive Voting Rights Act training at our next meeting. So that's something that will be forthcoming and that future chair, Commissioner Filkins-Weber, is aware of. Again, all commissioners will be responsible for completing their own ethics and sexual harassment training online, and we will be receiving that information in the coming days or week from our staff. And the last training item was that when Hans Johnson came to present to us, he left off at a piece of the presentation that I know multiple commissioners had expressed interest in going deeper on, and that was regarding adjustments, particularly prison adjustments. And so I will continue to task Mr. Miller, who we had some discussion about what that training could look like, with identifying whether it is Hans or whether it is somebody else that can delve deeper into the issue of the adjustments, particularly analysis of what's been done in other states, et cetera. So, go ahead, Commissioner.
Just one thought on that, because I think it might relate, is the lawsuit in Texas. I mean, if we're talking about certain populations and the analysis of the census data, it falls right in line, I think, with how we're going to deal with prisoners and what other states have done with prisoners, but I think it falls right in line with what other states are challenges other states are being faced with undocumented immigrants.
Definitely. I think I gave a handful of categories that included students, it included prisoners, it included undocumented immigrants, and I might be missing one or two, but he has some direction in that regard. Commissioner Baraba.
Yeah, for those of you who are interested, I would suggest you go to www.census.gov and hit Fact Finder, and there's an incredible amount of information about what's going on and when data is coming out, as it comes out, and if you go down any of the files, it gives you quite an enriching look at some of these issues. Fact Finder, yeah.
Within the
Census.gov, yeah.
Excellent. So with that, I would like to begin transitioning us to scheduling. Now, the purpose of what Commissioner Filkins-Weber is going to take on is to try and schedule our most immediate upcoming meetings. But before we do that, I did want to make some observations as your chair and sort of take the pulse of the Commission around a process suggestion that I have. it is very difficult to do certain tasks as a large group, particularly if we are starting from scratch and don't have concrete recommendations to respond to. And that's something that I'll come back to when we finalize our meeting procedures regarding the format of how we report back from our advisory committees to the full commission. What I wanted to explore with you, particularly now that we will be adding some additional staff capacity to the budget, was if the commissioners would be amenable to trying out a process where staff is tasked with coming up with some draft calendar scenarios for us that attempt to integrate projections on when we might need our business meetings, projections on as they continue to work with CCP and other contractors where they anticipate we might need to calendar things. My thinking is, of course, this would be a draft, just something for consideration, but they could potentially offer us more than one scenario, maybe one scenario that involves all the commissioners being at all the input hearings, another that has a more staggered approach, but that we really need to centralize this function, and that in my experience it is not an efficient way to do this to have the chair or the vice chair attempt to do it. It would depend on commissioners keeping up to date and really projecting out not just what their March calendar looks like, but sitting down over the coming days and looking out all the way to August 15th and being able to plug in their availability or rather when they're not available. So I wanted to throw that out for discussion. I have discussed it with staff, and they are willing to come back to the next meeting with that in mind. Commissioner Baraba.
I would support that. It's about time they start earning their money.
And we're finally happy to have a task.
So, when I say calendar, I maybe mean it a little more broadly. It could be, call it a calendar, call it a work plan. We really need to start getting a grip on what many months ahead are going to look at like. So if there's no further questions or concerns around that, we can leave it in staff's court working with the incoming chair to figure out what that looks like. Excellent. Seeing no discussion, I'll pass the floor over to Commissioner Filkins-Weber.
Based on some of the discussions that I've had with staff in considering the calendar, and given our meetings this week, we've agreed, contrary to what we had discussed in Claremont, we will not be meeting on March 10th and 11th. That would have required agenda notice yesterday. And the reason that we had considered that is primarily based on the fact of the pending award, and certainly want to keep in mind of efficiency of commissioners' time and efficiency of work. And had we considered meeting that week for our general meeting, we would certainly have to consider coming back the week of the 14th or the week of the 23rd. At this point, we still don't know if we'll need to come back the week of the 21st. But again, it depends on the contract. And that's what we're trying to strive for. If everything goes according to plan, and it appears that we might have the opportunity to consider the solicitations, or at least the bids for the technical expert, as I understand it. And correct me if I'm wrong, Mr. Claypool, if anything's changed in this process. But the full commission would have an opportunity to consider the proposal and to grant an award, more than likely somewhere around Friday the 18th or 19th is our goal. Is that right? If everything works out in the manner in which we have considered, but I understand there has been a change with the vote yesterday that we are agreeing on the IFB without the scoring methodology, that if that gets approved.
Certainly, Carol looked at and I haven't spoken with Carol today, so I don't know where the process is. But Carol looked at it yesterday and said, if we take the scoring out, it becomes so much easier for DGS, which puts us back on track for receiving the bids on the 15th, and the earliest that we could make an award would be the 18th. We could look at them any time after that, but that time frame would fit in line with our meeting on the 17th, 18th, and 19th.
Okay, so, and if legal could refresh my recollection as to what your intent and purpose was for the 15th, and were you suggesting that the Legal Advisory Committee would come together on that day, on Tuesday, the 15th?
Correct.
And for what purpose, sir?
We're asking people to submit their SOQ by March 14th. And then we will do that first cut that we had an earlier discussion about on 3/15, and that would be Tuesday, and it would be a committee, advisory committee meeting, public meeting, so we need to notice that, which we have time for. And then we would come, the advisory committee would then do interviews on March 17th, the first day of our meetings. And we would bring it to the full commission for a vote on the 18th.
Okay, so you were considering a proposal that the Legal Advisory Committee would meet on Tuesday in order to determine the candidates that would be interviewed on Thursday, the 17th, thus considering Thursday, the 17th, similar to what we have done previously, an advisory committee meeting day.
Correct.
And then full commission meeting on Friday, the 18th.
Correct.
Okay, in light of that proposal, in light of the fact that I am expected to be proposed chair, I have done my utmost in consideration of the last discussion that we had regarding calendar and our ongoing efforts to schedule meetings on Thursdays and Fridays. I am not available on Tuesday, March 15th, because I have done everything to bunch up my week on Mondays and Tuesdays. In light of the fact that and again, this is just a personal issue, but I just need to advise you as chair that I will not be here. So I don't know whether I need to consider turning over my responsibilities as chair. But again, I pushed a commitment. But aside from that, I am available on Thursday, the 17th, for the advisory committee meeting, probably in the latter part of the afternoon, if you consider the 3 to 5 session for interviews, but I'm not sure if that's what you're considering.
Yes, we agonized about your calendar when we were.
Trust me, I'm doing the same.
Yeah.
And I've bunched things up in a week that I really thought we were going to be free, and I mean that I would be free for business, because my week before that and my week after that is completely clear.
Yeah, and so we thought, well, we can do the first cut without you there, and I don't think this impacts your chairing at all.
Okay, well, I'm just throwing it out.
No, and then the idea was that, precisely as you said, we would follow the format, and a legal committee has been meeting from 3 to 5:30.
Okay.
And we thought we would just keep that
Wasn't
time.
it 3 to 6:30 or so?
Well, yeah, but you know,
when you were in
3 until we begin it for 3, and so that was the thinking precisely.
How many individuals were you anticipating interviewing on Thursday in your advisory committee?
We have no idea what we're going to get.
Oh no, I thought you were making your determination.
Oh, you mean on that? Yes.
Because you're actually interviewing on Thursday the 17th. So if you're limited to 4 and it's an hour each, then you need to maybe a 1 to 5 instead of your typical 3 to 6. So that's what I'm suggesting. First of all, for you to look at. That your timing might be different, so we need to advise staff on what the potential agenda will be for that, in addition to actually committing to a schedule today. So
what's your availability?
I'll be flying. I can probably make it in on at least my last, I think the flight arrives at 1:55 straight from the airport to here, provided I can get through security with my luggage, which I don't think I would be. But I could probably get here at 3 or 3:30 on that day.
Let's talk offline about the precise hour.
Okay, so
and we'll work with staff offline. But we will do that on Thursday. We will have a reduced number of candidates to interview.
Okay, one other caveat to this that I need to put out there is in the event that there's any holdup with DGS regarding the approval of the IFB, could push us back another week, probably into the 23rd, 24th, or 25th. And so I want us to keep that in mind, that we have kicked the 10th and the 11th. but and let me put this on the table, though, would legal be interested in still keeping their schedule for the 15th, 17th, and 18th to consider putting out an award or agreeing on a contract for the VRA if we are not in a position to consider the awards for the technical? In other words, would you be opening yourself up to the possibility of coming back the following week? And I'd like to throw it out now so that, because I will be asked this question as chair as we get information next week about how DGS is working with the proposal.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow.
Okay. It would
I
legal.
love coming to Sacramento. I'm available if,
Okay.
if you're asking that question. So I'm available that week. If we need to push it into the
I'm
following
saying, how urgent does legal feel that the necessity of putting out a bid for the VRA, or would you be willing to push it back?
A week.
If I hear next week that we're going to get, I will know next week,
right.
correct, Mr. Claypool, if we probably have to kick back the possibility of the award to technical into the following week.
What we will know next week is if we don't hear anything next week, it will absolutely push. Otherwise, we'll hear and we'll know.
Okay, so my question is if we don't hear anything, is legal willing to forego, or is the commission forego considering VRA interviews that week and push it to the following week?
Well, one, I'm available. Two, if we're not having any input hearings during March, I don't see a pressing need to have the VRA attorney on board. So if it goes back a week, and as long as we can get the person on, this is very tight, of course. So, if we can get the person on board prior to the first input hearing, that's ideal. Again, we're doing a lot of contingencies for the
Mr.
startup
Claypool.
times. So I have no problem with pushing it back a week.
Okay.
Okay, may I echo Commissioner Blanco's concern the other day that these are the two most critical decisions we're going to make, and I think we need as a commission to make a special dispensation. I think we need to lock that 17th, 18th date and
I'm
get
going
that.
to do it today.
Okay, good.
But
And know that we might have to come back.
absolutely, that's what my intent is. But in the it's going to happen next week. If I just want to know the thoughts, open, public, hearing what legal's concerned. I don't want there to be something behind the scenes that says, well, why did we push it a week? I want it to really be that there's a strong possibility we could kick it. But today we'll set the schedule, more than likely for the 17th and 18th. But are you willing, if I know next week that we're not going to hear this award, would you be willing to push it over just one more week? Because
I have reservations about that because I'm concerned that we aren't going to find somebody that can drop everything they're doing and join us quickly. And so the sooner we have an offer out, the sooner that person can, or whatever entity can go back and wrap up. We know what it was like, and we all know what that's like.
And I have an observation, and we have a commissioner in the stack as well. Commissioner Blanca, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, that's
Continue.
okay. So I don't want to push it back. I really am concerned if we push back the hire date, then we push back, the interview, then we push back the hire, then the time the person takes to wrap up. And then we are into input meetings that are happening without having prep time for us with an attorney.
Yes. And as acting
I'm
chair.
willing to come back again rather than lose that date.
Duly noted. And as acting chair for this meeting, as we've just discussed the training that remains to be done, one of our concerns is how packed the various meetings are, and we need to continue working to schedule and provide the potential trainers some options on when they can actually come back and meet with us versus here's the only day and the only time that you can come back. And so that would give us some more flexibility to make sure that we have the substantive training we need to actually go into the input phase in a way that we're informed. Commissioner DiGiulio.
Can I just suggest that all of us commissioners keep both those weeks open, and we'll deal with the actual elements when it arises. And I've made those open. Those weeks are open. Period. I think one thing we haven't actually discussed is for the review of the technical consultants. We touched on it a little bit, but is it the same process as what the legal is going through? Because we as a technical committee need to put that down as well if we're going to be reviewing. I thought we had some discussion whether the technical is going to vet it the similar way, or are we going to have it as a full commission for our scoring?
I believe that for this commission, it will be a different process, and it will be a process where, for instance, you're going to open up your bids by a technical committee and go through them. There's so much scrutiny on this that I think you as a commission need to open these up in public, and then do your review right there and then, and have it done. That's why I'm not envisioning this personally as seeing this as being a multi-day process. I'm seeing this as almost being a very, very long day, similar to today, where you just go through these bids. First, make sure that first open up with public comment, then go through the bids and make sure that they're sufficient, that they have all the elements that they're required to, and then go through as a commission and do the pass-fail, look at the bid, and then make your award. That's how I think I'm envisioning it, and that's why we went to this simplified process. But it's never been done. I've never heard of this being done in public before, ever. And that's always done. So, the faster, the cleaner it is, the faster you do it, and particularly not to leave and then make an overnight thing and then come back. I think that's what we're envisioning.
So just as a point to that is just to clarify, we can work out the details later in the sense of time and give that information to commissioners. But I do want to make a point that Dan had mentioned this earlier, is that we as individuals would literally sit there we would not have the ability to discuss anything. We would look through, plan on reading a lot in your own little world with your own little note-taking, and then we can discuss as a big group, but we would be physically there on camera showing that we were reading them without discussion amongst each other. If I understand, that's partly how this is going to work.
Sorry, Commissioner Baraba and then Commissioner Ward.
Do we have a rough idea of how many we're going to receive?
No, and remember that this is going to be a national.
I guess my only concern is if there's 20 items sitting in front of us, 20 bids sitting in front of us, and there's 14 of us sitting around the table, and there's no review or screening prior to that, that's going to be a really complex day. I'm not sure how you get through that.
Mm-hmm. Commissioner Ward?
One of the things I would say is by going to the pass-fail, and staff your staff can be there to assist you because it's going to be, the public's going to be there and they're going to see us. There was an issue with the fact that your staff wasn't vetted the same way you were, and you heard the comments of individuals from both sides of the political spectrum all wanting the same thing, wanting to see this being done in public. But because we've gone to this pass-fail, your staff can go through with you and very quickly, as quickly as you can with as many as we get, decide whether you have sufficiency. Then you can go through and make the pass-fail on as high a bar as as we put into the document. And then with that, it really becomes a very simple process. Then it's lowest responsible bidder, and the key will be on the word responsible. You have to make a determination as to whether or not Dan Claypool comes in at $10,000 for a $750,000 job is responsible. But you'll make those decisions. We will have to decide on that criteria. By the way, I am not submitting, but we will have that criteria up front, and then it should be pretty straightforward. The thing that you have to know is, with this process, and as the gentleman, Mr. Teppan, said, it's not a process that's going to allow a lot of qualitative discussion. It's a process that's going to very quickly come to a fairly clear-cut winner, and it's going to be seen.
I didn't mind the work. Your comment was that we should probably do it in one day, and I guess I was questioning whether that was feasible.
If there are 200 of them, then it won't get done in one day, and I think that the public will understand that. The big thing in my mind, and this is just talking with with Carol and everything, is any break where you leave, or any computers open, all these things are going to leave that perception. There's a reason this room doesn't have very good reception, and that's because they don't like these legislators with their computers open, because they don't know who's communicating with them while they're going through their votes. I mean, these are all things on that day that will be very major considerations for us, because on that day, I believe we'll have a packed house, and I believe that they'll all be there to see this get done. If it can be done in one day, it just makes it that much cleaner. If it can't, then it can't.
Okay.
Commissioner Filkins-Weber?
With that in mind, then it's my understanding, and what we would more than likely do is, first I would ask staff to diary, of course, to the due date for the agenda for March 15th, which, as I have, is March 1st. Of course, please correct me if I'm wrong. You guys do this better than me. So that obviously would be this coming Tuesday, that we would have to provide the agenda for legal. Does legal suggest that there be any other language for the agenda to advise staff other than our customary language, or will the customary language, which includes consideration of VR council procedures, criteria, including conflicts, would that be sufficient, or do you want it to be specific reference, council or committee?
I think it has to be more specific.
I think that this is the type of thing that could be handled offline.
Sure. Yeah. Okay, but just so that we know, so you'll get the language to staff. Thank you, and that should be done no later than Monday. It was Monday at noon. So.
Just a process point. As we adopted at the last meeting, agenda items go through the chair. So
only because this was the subcommittee, or excuse me, it was the advisory committee number 1, and I'm not going to be present to be chair on that day. So
I'm just repeating what our process is. Our process is that, whether you're physically there or not, if you're acting chair, that's part of the role, is to collect item for the agenda, so that that the chair is overseeing and actually making decisions about what goes on any given agenda, and then directing staff to create that agenda.
Oh, for advisory committees as well?
For all
I didn't understand.
Public agenda.
Oh, then fine.
You don't have to be here to do that.
No, that's fine.
Yeah.
I didn't understand that the chair was doing that for the advisory committees as well. Okay, because I did my own agenda for the legal advisory. Okay. Then I would ask that staff, again, diary March 3rd for the due date to provide notice for the March 17th hearing, which, as I understand, let's go ahead, unless the Commission has comments otherwise, do the general notice that we have for the advisory committees, unless suggested otherwise by the Commission, similar to what we did for Wednesday, February 23rd.
Again, any commissioners who have agenda items to suggest, again, we go back to our process that we decided in Claremont, which is you would have 48, I'm talking off of the top of my head here, let me pull it up. I think it's 72 hours. Yes, 72 hours prior to the scheduled meeting, which is essentially 3 days prior, commissioners would submit suggested agenda items to the chair. That includes for the advisory committees. 48 hours prior to the meeting, the chair then submits that agenda to staff for legal review and posting, and then 24 hours prior to the scheduled meeting, or even before, if it's available, staff will post that expanded agenda to the website and distribute it to the full commission.
We love that.
Is there a second meeting you want to put on the calendar?
The first is the 17th through the 19th. Based on some of the discussion from Mr. Claypool, would you want to notice it at least through the 20th? Because of we're doing two things, and that's essentially what the focus would be on, aside from any other things that somebody may ask to be added to the agenda, but we're consideration of VR counsel and the consideration of the technical expert in the manner in which you described, which could take an entire day. So should we notice it through a longer period of time?
I think that we should do the same thing we did for this meeting and just say that we will roll over on Sunday the 20th if necessary, for the specific purpose of finishing the review of that bid.
Okay, then one other, I think we need to raise this other issue, given the likelihood of what's being anticipated for the day in which we consider the bids, and I know that, Chair, you had suggested that we take another look at the procedures for public comment, and we've had that. I do believe we should set up, at this point, the procedures for, as Mr. Claypool had suggested, the time frame for public comment in the morning. If we, for instance, have to consider 100 or 50, whatever the case may be, bids, and do it in an open public hearing, and there will likely be members of the public that would wish to comment on those, probably even before we open them. So some of the proposals were to notify the public that open public comment would be provided. And I want this to put on the agenda. That's why I'm asking for clarification, because we did not have a final determination on this procedural issue, that public comment would take place at 9:30. From 9:30 to 10:30 would be the first opportunity for public for public comments, and then again at another time.
May I ask one point of clarification? Are you suggesting this or something like it as something we adopt formally as our part of our meeting procedures for every meeting, or you're suggesting a specific procedure for this specific purpose?
It could be either way, but I think it's necessary for at least to, at a minimum, to set up what the procedure will be for the March 18th full commission meeting. And the reason being is that if we anticipate everything going along as scheduled, we need to make a determination so that the public is made aware of what our process and procedure will be for accepting public comment and how that procedure will take place, because our work likely in the hearing will be reading these bids, and therefore, the public should be made aware when they will have an opportunity to do so, and all the commission should be fully advised as to the limited time. Again, we need to consider that it would be for 1 hour, for instance, in the morning, so that then the commission can get to opening the bids and start reading. That's what I'm suggesting. So if we just open public comment, then 200 members of the public that I'm certainly know are going to show up, which would be great, and we'd love to have them, we could potentially take up the entire day unless we considered that procedure. That's all I'm suggesting.
The two things I would say, whatever we should put in a protocol that we use for all procedures, because we're going to, in all likelihood, do the same procedure if we have an inline process and we do it. So whatever we do once, we should do always, or as close as possible. If we have to tweak it later because of something, we will. The second thing, I would think about this long and hard. I believe that you want public comment before they're open. They can comment on anybody that they want while those are sealed. And then if you want public comment, they can have the public comment after you finish the scoring and you've made the award. But do you want to be in the position of taking public comment and then changing a score that or changing something in order to on public comment that might change the bid? Now, the beauty of this process is pass, fail, that high bar. And these 5 out of the 100 passed. Now it's really low bid, and they win. That's the way this sets up without having that scoring matrix that everybody hates. So it will be fairly known as soon as that happens who passed that criteria, and people can have public comment at that point. I would just say that public comment can talk about the process, talk about the bidders, talk about anybody else, but we don't want it to alter that decision.
Let me just review in brief form what we have already adopted as our procedure for public comment, which of course is open to being amended. That comments from each public member are limited to 5 minutes, and that we reserve the right to shorten it to 3 minutes where necessary. That we offer a public comment opportunity before voting on each agenda item, except where there has been a prior opportunity to comment when a matter has been discussed in committee and is coming before the full commission for vote without substantial change from what happened in the committee. That we have in place a public comment for items not on the agenda at the beginning and the close of the meeting. What we tried to do in this meeting was to just explore a couple different options on that, and I'm hoping before we go home today we can just land on what are our standing times for accommodating the not on the agenda public comment. So FYI, that's what we have so far. Commissioner Aguirre.
Just a clarification question regarding public comment. Public comment has to occur before an actual decision is made, correct?
Well, the language is before or during. I believe if, as a result of that language, before, if you choose to take the comment in the morning first,
Yeah.
you have satisfied the requirement.
Yeah, but the discussion was, if we make a decision on one individual, or if we make an award, and then we have public comment, and then based on that information, we have to go back into the pool and change that, then that implies that we made the decision before public comment. So I just want to be clear that, my understanding of PC is that you either entertain it before, during, but not after the decision is made.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So if you entertain comment before the bids are open at the start of the meeting, I believe you've fulfilled the requirement.
Yeah. Okay.
So would someone like to make a proposal? I think there's two things that can be done. What I'd like to do is focus on this particular meeting. If someone can make a proposal, what that process for public comment should look like.
I would propose that for the purposes of our consideration of the bids for the technical expert, so whether that occurs on March 18th or a date in the following week, this proposal would be for the same. So it's just as to the meeting for the consideration of the technical experts, that we consider a start time of 9 a.m., that we would open the agenda with, as we customarily do, brief introduction, and then immediately go into open public comment on matters that are not on the agenda. Allow a minimum of, given the necessity to get through each of the anticipated large number of bids, that the open public comment on matters not on the agenda be limited to 30 minutes in consideration of the members of the public that would like to comment specifically on those potential bidders. And so by approximately 9:30, we would then open public comment for 1 hour from 9:30 to 10:30 for consideration of the specific agenda item related to those submitting bids. And then to the extent there are quite a number of people who wish to comment further, that we could extend that another half an hour, but we can make consideration of that based on availability of time and the members of the public who wish to speak. And thereafter, the full commission would consider the bids and then follow customary rules of procedure depending on what motion may be on the floor for awards thereafter. That was a lot, but I think it spells it out based on all the public comment that we've needed for time frame. I think it's based on everything that we've said that maybe we need to do that, but I'm certainly open to any other suggestions.
Are there any concerns or questions about what has been stated? Mr. Miller, no?
Now, I was just going to suggest, given it is a long motion, that perhaps it would be most efficient for Commissioner Filkins-Weber to read that back a second time rather than asking the clerk to do it.
And that was not clear. You got it?
Very slowly for court reporters.
It does. That would permit us to follow our procedure of hearing the motion twice, and this one is a complicated motion.
And let me clarify, were you expressing it in the form of a motion?
Yes, I was.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah. Oh, I need a second.
Commissioner Baraba seconded. If I could please have it read back. Okay.
Oh, you got it. Okay. She's so good.
Please correct me if I don't have it correct. For purposes of considering bids for the technical expert, that the commission consider a 9 o'clock start time, that an introduction be made to the meeting as usual, that we open up public comment for non-agendized items for a total of 30 minutes only, that comment being specifically on the bidders. From 9:30 to 10:30, the consideration of specific items for those who are submitting bids. And if needed, public comment would then be extended for another 30 minutes, and then the full commission would consider the bids.
Few clarifications. The 9:30 to 10:30 is open public comment regarding the specific agenda item, which are those technical experts submitting bids. It's not that they would be providing any public comment, not the bidders themselves. But, I'm sorry.
I don't think you can preclude them from speaking.
Oh, no, no, no.
Member of the
It was
public, but-
certainly, I understand that. I just didn't want it to be phrased as looking as if it would only be those bidders, and that's what it appeared to be. That's all. Certainly, they can come up as members of the public.
So on those who have submitted bids.
Correct, on the agendized item. Correct.
Any additional clarifications?
Nope. I think that's
Okay, open for discussion. Seeing none, are there any members? Oh, sorry.
Question, no. Remind me what our process is right now for getting public comments. Are we all just picking them up off the web ourselves? I'm just thinking we're going to get a lot. One of the things that's going to make this even richer is that we're going to have, I suspect, a lot of written comments submitted to us, and so just want to figure out where that fits into the equation for all. I mean, it's not new, but I just want to nail that down.
Shanice? They're asking about how the public comments that we receive. What's our procedure for making sure they have them?
I believe, and I hope this is correct, that Raul is reviewing them now, and I believe they're being posted. Are they?
Let me make a little bit of a clarification. That I believe the commissioners were sent public comment, and they're posted. It was posted this past week on the web, and I think that we need to clarify whether they will also be sent at the same time while they're being posted to commissioners, or if they're going to be just posted on the web. That's my question. Okay.
I would just like to note, in the interest of time, that we are about to lose the commissioner that will allow us to take this vote. So I believe that we can come back to this procedure around email after we deal with the actual vote that's on the floor. So if there are any questions or comments related to this motion specifically, okay, seeing none, our member of the public, please come forward.
Long day. For this comment, I choose not to identify myself as Jim Wright. How are the members of the public going to be aware of who the bidders are? Are you going to post the names of the bidders on the website so that they can make comments about them?
Thank you. We can, again, public comment closed, we can actually move to a vote on this matter. We can come back to these details around how we collect the comment and post the bidder information. Thank you very much, unidentified member of the public. I'd like to take a vote, and I'd like to do a show of hands. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed? Did the motion pass?
Yes, the motion.
Okay, excellent.
I do apologize for leaving. I pinky swore my kids I'd get back before bedtime tonight, and I can't break a pinky swear. But I just wanted to just mention very quickly, if the commission is comfortable with it, that I think there are some details that will probably have to be worked out in terms of the some of the form, the levels of details for the review, and that can we agendize it with our general intentions and have some of those details disseminated to the rest of the commissioners? In terms of the technical committee, maybe working with staff on those?
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean. The committee as a whole cannot engage with us. That is a public meeting if the entire committee is...
No, I'm sorry. It sounds like there's still some issues around how there's certain elements of the review of the technical, of the bids that we will be receiving.
If I might, so as we develop with Carol Umfleet our plan for how this should go, would it be acceptable to send that to all commissioners so that they could so that they could see it, or should we only work through one technical committee?
We can send it to them to see it, but we have to ask what is the purpose. If each is commenting only to us, and then we're not in turn giving that comment back, we could do it. But I don't know that that's a very good procedure. Let's say we receive 14 different views on an aspect of what we send them. We're not in a position then to respond to the entire commission on the totality of the comments we receive. I think that, and then make adjustments. We're having a meeting at that point. I would suggest that if we need to engage, that perhaps 2 commissioners be chosen, the chair and the vice chair, for example, our procedure, and be given authority by the commission to make the decisions about the bid process. But we can't engage. I just don't feel it's possible to receive comment back from all 14 commissioners, make adjustments, and not seriously be in jeopardy of violating the serial meeting rule.
Would it be appropriate, Kirk, to meet with the legal committee on the 15th when they're in full session and vet the procedures?
As long as we agendize that matter, it would be from Bagley-Keene perspective, that would be fine.
Okay. Is that something the commission would want?
I've asked Commissioner Hanchetta to give that to you because I'm going to be traveling and can't get it by noon. So we're saying not only to agendize that we will specifically be reviewing Voting Rights Act applicants and doing a first cut, but that in addition, the Legal Advisory Committee will also be reviewing the procedures for the bid process. Is that correct?
The bid review process.
The bid review process.
So we're going to do that? Okay. Is that?
I think it's going to be pretty straightforward. There are not going to be a lot of decision points in this. Mainly what you'll be doing is looking at the process and seeing that you kind of agree with the overall flow and deciding, you may have to decide where you want to place the bar on the pass-fail. But
okay. So does the commission have to delegate that to us?
We don't actually have enough commissioners to take a vote at this point in time.
Can we actually do anything on that day?
Well, you could make a recommendation to the commission without them asking you to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. Okay. And I'll work with staff on the language. Yeah.
So.
Oh, well, I thought it was my obligation to do that as chair, to work with staff regarding the the agendas for advisory and the full commission. So I just made detailed notes.
Okay. Oh, I thought you had asked us to get the.
You weren't going to be there.
But you can do the agenda language.
I'm doing the agenda language.
Yeah. We weren't sure if you were going to do that, so that's fine.
Okay.
Great.
I thought it was my job duty. So.
Yeah, we were doing that.
So I think that's it on scheduling. In regards to our meeting procedures, our ongoing meeting procedures outside of this special, can I just, we're very close to wrapping up here. So the question on the table is, at what times do we want to institutionalize having our public comment during the course of a regular business day? We've tried it in the morning, we've tried it in the evening, we've tried it after lunch. So I'm open to suggestions. And this will really apply to Commissioner Filkins-Weber's meeting coming up.
Well, I don't know necessarily that it will, since we just passed a motion that would apply to the technical, but I would propose, let's just move forward, since, that for our general meetings, because again, this is separate and apart from what we are describing as outreach or input hearings, but for our general meetings, under due regard that we are commencing at 9 a.m., we would then have the customary brief introduction. I would then propose that we allow 30 minutes for non-agendized items. To the extent in which there are quite a number of members of the public who wish to provide public comment, we could consider increasing that by 30 minutes. To the extent, and then I would consider for the benefit of the public and quite a number of people when we've been outside of Sacramento, we're interested in providing public comments after lunch rather than waiting till the end of our business day. So I would then consider a proposal that, generally speaking, if we reconvene after a lunch recess at 1 a.m. or 1 p.m., or at any time thereafter, we open up a public comment for a half an hour after we resume from our lunch time. And again, to the extent in which there's a possibility of additional members of the public who wish to speak beyond that 30 minutes, we could consider increasing that to another 30 minutes for a full hour. And then, again, in the interests of those who may be interested in attending our meetings at the evening time, that we consider a half an hour at the last close of business for public comment further.
So what I can do, given that we're not enough commissioners here to take a vote, unless there's any major dissent to these suggestions, I can build this into our draft meeting procedures, and then you can bring that back to the full commission when we meet later in March for consideration. I will also add the suggestion proposed by Commissioner DiGiulio, which we seemed in concept supportive of, around all documents that come before the commission need to have dates on them. So I'll add that in as well. So with that, homework, please submit your bios, your updated bios to Mr. Wilcox by close of business Tuesday at the latest. And spend some time on the Google Calendar looking all the way out through August, so that as we've directed staff to do some work planning and calendaring, that they have the ability to do that. And remember, as you put in your availability, to add your party affiliation. Commissioner Ward.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Chair. I just want to make sure. I think Commissioner DiGiulio's input was date and origin. I believe both of those were important. Or
Can you explain the word origin?
yeah, who is it from?
Who drafted it? Gotcha. Okay, author. Thank you. Sorry. So with that, all we have left are our accomplishments our summary of accomplishments by Mr. Wilcox, public comment for item not on the agenda, and then a couple of quick announcements about tomorrow's proceedings. So, Mr. Wilcox.
Thank you. The commission was called to order at 9:05 a.m. by Chair Columbus Malloy. The commission heard public comment. Commissioner Dye presented the Finance and Administration Advisory Committee report, and Mr. Claypool presented the budget. They did that in two phases during today's meeting. The commission approved the hiring with a 14-0 vote of 3 full-time retired annuitants at 2 months each. 1 legal half-time for 6 months. The commission voted to approve on a 13-0 vote the commission's budget through fiscal year 2011-2012. There was a presentation on redistricting by Doug Johnson of the Rose Institute. The Outreach Advisory Committee was presented by Commissioner Ontai. The commission voted on a 13-0 vote to award a contract to CCP not to exceed $100,000. Any activities must be approved by Commissioner Filkins Weber after consulting with the Commission's Outreach Advisory Committee liaison and the Commission's Communications Director. There was a presentation by the Commission's Chief Counsel, Mr. Miller, and Marion Johnston on the Bagley-Keene Act. Presentation by Commissioner Raya on the Public Information Advisory Committee, and a report was given by the Communications Director. The Commission set the dates of March 17th through the 20th for their next Commission meeting, and the Commission voted 10-0 to adopt certain guidelines for the March 18th meeting in consideration of the technical expert. This synopsis, which I've just read, will be available online at redistrictingca.org and at the Commission's Facebook page. This will be this evening, and that's at California Citizens Redistricting Commission. Thank you.
Commissioner Blanco.
I think we should include in our decision to not do public educational meetings as a decision in and of itself. If we just say that we awarded the contract to CCP,
yes,
it doesn't really capture that, and that was a pretty significant decision.
Okay, absolutely.
Yes, I concur with Commissioner Blanco. I do think that perhaps adding some language around the alternative methodologies, I think it could come across as though we don't view education as an important component of this process. I think we changed our framework on how we are going to approach education. So,
how about scaling back previously discussed outreach and education meetings and discussed other avenues for public education, and then to talk about that contract?
Yeah.
Okay.
I trust you as staff that you get the intent of what we're trying to express there.
Thank you.
With that, are there any members of the public who would like to comment on items not on the agenda? Seeing none. The last announcements I have are, we have a reminder to the public. Tomorrow morning we will be having our session to receive information on outreach efforts. It will be starting at 9 a.m. here in the State Capitol Building in room 126. The State Capitol Building actually opens at 9 a.m. on Saturday and Sunday. The only entrance that will be available to the public is the one at 11th and L Street. Another piece of information that would be useful for the public to know is that on Saturday, tomorrow at noon, there is a rally that will be happening actually across the nation in front of every state house and major city to stand in solidarity with the people of Wisconsin. We're not able to anticipate how significant in size this will be, but it might impact traffic, parking. Luckily, it's on a weekend, so just want our public who might be coming to present or to attend that this will be occurring. The final announcement I have is that with the long and productive days we've had here, we do not anticipate needing to meet on Sunday. The only exception would be if we had such a tremendous turnout tomorrow that there was no way we could finish our hearing tomorrow. But at this point, that does appear unlikely. So with that, thank you for all your hard work today. Mr. Claypool is eyeing me.
Go ahead and finish it. I just have a minor point. I'm presuming all meetings that we've discussed are in Sacramento. Agenda. I just want to make sure that's
Yes.
set.
Yes.
I apologize.
Thank you.
When you say in Sacramento, the capital?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, excellent. So those meetings will be happening. So then our next, Jody, would you like to just remind the public? We'll announce it at the end of tomorrow because that will be our formal adjournment. So for that, adjourning for the evening, we will reconvene tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. I did offer public comment, and nobody responded.
I'm sorry, I did not hear you say that. I must have been doing something else.
Well, we called for Jim Wright, but he wasn't here.
Evidently, there's a member of the public who did not hear or respond to the offer for public comment for items not on the agenda, so we will turn it over to our member of the public.
Thank you. My apologies. I should get a hearing aid. I just want to make a quick observation about collecting information from the public. There's really only 4 pieces of information that you require. First of all, you need a label for the submission that they're making. Secondly, you need a description of the boundaries of the area that they're talking about, the geographic parameters. Thirdly, you need information about why they consider this to be important. And fourth, you need to identify who it is that proposed it. Have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. With that, we are adjourned until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Thank you. Have a great night.